and that's a good thing. You may not realize it. The thought of staying home sounds great, right? You can sit in your pajamas. For anatomy, it's not a good learning environment. And some of y'all are like, no, the kids are there. It's summer. I won't be there. I love my kids, but I love time away too. We were talking about we grew up close to each other. So. He's from Fort Worth. I grew up in Arlington, Texas. I say grew up there. From 3rd grade on, I was in Arlington, Texas. Before that, I went to, y'all are going to think I'm lying, probably 15 different schools. And my parents were not in the military. I don't know why we did that. I think it has to do with like when the bills come due and you can't pay them, you got to move. Yeah, y'all are laughing, but I'm being, it was funny, but I'm being serious. I don't know. I went all over the place. I lived in Arlington, Texas, matter of fact, before 3rd grade. I lived in 4 different houses, went to 3 different schools. Crazy. But I wound up here. I don't know. You ever seen that guy that says you could look at all the effed up things that have happened to you in your life and you could write them down? I forget his name. I saw this. I'm stealing this. I thought about it. And he said, you wrote all those down, and you go, wow, all these screwed up things happened to me. But you're still sitting here in PA school, aren't you? That's a thought process of, yeah. So what else can you take? I can take anything. I don't throw it at me. I always say, I still know how to dig a ditch. I'll take my PA license and go for it. I can dig a ditch. Some days I wouldn't mind digging a ditch. You ever had that thought? What do you want me to do today, Bob? Go over there and dig that ditch all day. Got it. You want to talk to anybody? I dig a ditch. Anyway, y'all are a good class in that we interact a little more now as we're starting to go. But the problem is some of y'all get real tired. So why didn't he tell us? I don't want to know about his family. It's because if you start talking about y'all, that gets me in trouble. I start going, hey, what's this? Or I mess with you too much, or I say negative things. I just focus on myself because I can say any negative thing I want about myself. All right, cerebellum. I'll just let you know I'm a little crazy. We left off here. We're discussing the parts of the brain. Specifically, we were looking at the brain stem. And on the posterior side of that, we're going to see we have our cerebellum. When you look at neurons, when you think about neurons in the brain, I love this percentage, not that we're going to learn percentages, but half of the neurons that you have in the brain as a whole are in your cerebellum. And your cerebellum does no cognitive, no perception. It's completely associated with controlling movements, like we talked about yesterday, kicking a soccer ball and adjusting it as it goes. So they call it the second largest part of the brain. Like I said, it's packed with neurons. And it's a funny looking structure, and they have some funny names for it. They even have the name of I always say of the cook in the 5 conduits in Afghanistan, like we were talking about. It's a couple of us were, not all. If you look at the central part of it, it has a worm-looking structure called the vermis. And then on each side of that, just like we see in the cerebrum, we have cerebellar hemispheres. And then all the little folds that we see are called ridges or convolutions. And then inside, you have what appears to look like leaves. And so this is like a tree. I think I say it on another slide. That's the arbor vitae, or tree of life. That's how it looks, but when we look at individual areas, oh, there it is. Cerebellar cortex is gray because that's all the neurons. The white, of course, the tree of life portion is going to be all of the tracts that are going back to the rest of the brain and on out to muscles, things that it's controlling. So when we look at this cerebellum, I referenced kicking, a soccer ball, and you're going to say the main function is to evaluate what we decided to do and what's actually happening. So it's like your brain talks to a muscle, group of muscles and says, hey, we're going to do this activity, but we're going to tell the cerebellum what's going on at the same time. So there would be pathways from like a motor cortex area that goes to control the muscles for the action you want to do, and it would also at the same time send information to the cerebellum. On the flip side, if you look at sensory, the sensory from the receptors in your leg would also be coming up to the cerebellum through some pathways we got to talk about. And so you have a constant evaluation of how well the action you initiated voluntarily is going. And you would see that very readily if you had cerebellar damage. You wouldn't be able to do that action very easily. There's the whole slide. Posture, balance are of course included in that. I'll talk about what happens when you have cerebellar damage in a second. The lobes of the hemispheres are what actually, the actual term for what I'm describing is unconscious refinements of skeletal muscle movements. Unconscious because we don't know that it's doing that. You get drunk, you'll know that it's not doing that. Flacco was a cook in Kunduz, Afghanistan, Kunduz, however you want to say it. And I literally locked and loaded on Flacco at the gate one day. I didn't tell you all this, right? It's normally where I tell it. So I always remember the Flacco nodule lobe. It contributes to equilibrium and balance. He was about to lose his. Because he thought to lose everything. Because apparently when we got there to this little fob, he had been the cook there. Well, right before we got there, there was a bunch of special forces, high-speed individuals, and they were eating chickens and goats. They had them living on it. Then they brought in these fancy, high-speed embedded training teams. And I say that laughing because we weren't high-speed at all. My goodness. But I thought we were going to be, that's a whole other story. Until we got to Fort Riley and I saw the people I was with. And not that I'm that high-speed, but I'm more high-speed than them. They barely walk. But anyway, we were, like we talked about, they were starting to build up things. So we were bringing like 40 to 60 like local Afghans onto this little fob every day so they could start building it up. There was nothing hardly out there. And so we had to clear them at the gate because there's only a few of us there, like 6, well, there was more of us there at the time because the last group was still there. So we had probably 20-something people there at the time, 2 teams. And we're fielding people at the gate, searching them, making sure they can come on the base. And this dude, they put PA out on the gate, which is, you had multiple roles. It's a team. Anyway, it's not a great idea, but hey, we can do it. And I'm getting all these people in there, and this dude just comes strolling. I'm sorry, y'all can't picture this. I'm doing this because there's pescos directing you into our front. We lived inside of an Afghan, bunch of A&A police officers were surrounding us. So if they want to take us out anytime, we could. Anyway, he's coming in these pescos, and he just starts walking right on by me. And I start yelling at him to stop, and then I turn around, locked and loaded on Flacco and dropped him to the ground. Not physically, but you're going to get out. And they made fun of me forever because he was the cook. And they said, that's the cook. And I said, I know it's the cook, but I'm going to leave Afghanistan. I don't care who he is coming through that gate. You're going to go through the line. You can come to the front. I don't mind you skipping all these yays I don't know, but you're going to get searched before you come in here, dude. Y'all agree with me on that? I'm like, they made fun of me forever for that. I almost shot Flacco. I didn't really like the Flacco was actually a pretty nice guy. And I say chow hall. When I say chow hall, I'm talking one king's knight's table and another little cooking room, like a little Mexican food place here in town. Looking. That was what it was. So he's the only cook. I'm like, man, I don't know if I can go eat at that facility anymore. Anyway, that's it. Flacco taught me about Afghan financing. In Afghanistan, I gave him $20. I said, can you go get me a mirror? Because you had to cut your own hair in Afghanistan. He said, can you get me a little mirror? And he said, yeah, I'll get you a mirror in town. He comes back and gives me $10 back. And I said, no, you keep it for going to get the mirror. No, you keep it for going to the mirror. He said, no, he could speak English kind of. Let me explain it to you. When you gave me the $20, I went and bought the mirror for $5 or whatever it was. I gave it to him in napkin. And he said, I already took my cut, basically. He was honest about it. He said, what do you mean you already took your cut? He said, if you give an Afghan money, he'll get you something. He's going to take a cut. And that's the whole country. Actually, that's our country too. But anyway, that level of corruption exists everywhere, I think. But they're just more open about it. Yeah, I took some money. Okay. Sorry. I got to stay on track. Okay. That's the floccular nodule. So maybe you'll remember that. This picture of Flocco falling to the ground. He wasn't a very coordinated individual to begin with. Hey, cerebellar peduncles. Didn't we already hear that word? Those were, yes. So, you got a question about Flocco?
Not about Flocco.
Okay, go ahead.
So between the two structures, right? So with cerebellar damage or impairment, is it going to be they're all equally affected, or is one going to be the other?
Like right or left hemispheres?
Or like the anterior posterior lobes or the
Yes, I didn't go into it in the slides, but you can map out areas of the cerebellum just like you can the cerebral cortex to show what muscles it's helping to coordinate. So, and we're not really going to get into that, but yes, you could map it out and say, well, this controls upper extremity areas or helps to refine the movements of upper extremity. You can map it out. Just a little farther than we have to go. We had cerebral peduncles on the anterior side of that brainstem, and now we have cerebellar peduncles. As we start learning this, when you look at the anterior side of the brainstem, remember we had the pons, the bridge that went across? And I said, well, those are going to connect to the cerebellum. They're connecting the pons. We're looking at the posterior side. Now, I know that everybody already went, yes, of course, this is kind of a posterior lateral view. I knew you already knew that because yesterday I told you, what should you look at to determine whether you're looking at the posterior or anterior side of the brainstem? These are superior and inferior colliculi, and on the anterior side, somebody said you would have the mammillary bodies. That'll let you know. If you see those four, you're at the posterior side. And so the bridge or the pons comes around and connects to the cerebellum back here. It's been cut away, but it would be here. That's what connects them. There's superior, middle, inferior. You don't have to label which one is which. It's just understanding they're tracks that'll help connect the pons to the cerebellum. We got to have pathways to get all this information. And so I put a slide because they sound so similar. I threw an extra slide in here to say, hey, remember the difference. You have cerebellar and then cerebral peduncles. I've never looked up how they came up with the word peduncles. And I'm probably butchering the word, but I like to say it that way. Peduncles. All right, so what if we have cerebellar damage, like we were just talking about? You're going to have an inability to coordinate your muscular movements. And you're going to be uncoordinated. And that could be from infection, injuries, a blow to the head, degenerative changes, or, I didn't put it on this slide, we talked about it, I think, on the next, if you have alcohol. Right? If you take somebody and you blindfold them, it makes it much harder to do coordinated movements, such as tilt your head back and touch your finger to your nose. Why don't your cerebellum, if it has damage or you've been drinking really affects your cerebellum. And so you see those people on there and they're drunk and they're trying to touch everywhere because they can't get to their nose. Now, why do we have them close their eyes? Yeah. If you can see your finger, proprioception too, because you got to keep balance. You tilt your head up, you're off balance a little bit, right? They're making you a little bit off balance if you have drinking or cerebellar damage. But they're having you close your eyes because if you can see it, you're more likely to get it there. because you're taking out that special sense of sight. But it is proprioception what gets it there. But proprioception involves a lot of different sensors, but it greatly involves cerebellum too. And then if you, I mean, this whole slide, if you say ataxia, cerebellar damage from whatever reason, alcohol, infection, just picture somebody drunk. Because your speech patterns become abnormal, because your cerebellum is going to help you control those too. You may have staggering or abnormal walking. All right, diencephalon. We went through the brain stem, and we got above the midbrain, and now before we get to the cerebrum, we're going to have the diencephalon area. This is what you're talking, this whole area is concerning what you're largely discussing with Mr. Ruggiero there for endocrine. This is where we're going to find things like the hypothalamus, the thalamus, the epithalamus. That whole structure is called the diencephalon, and there's 4 parts. Probably 3 parts, but most books list it as 4 parts. It's an anatomy kind of separation. Thalamus, epithalamus, hypothalamus, pineal gland. I left it that way, you know, me and my boss were talking about it. The pineal gland is actually part of the epithalamus. Now, I did not put that note down there for you to key in on it like I'm trying to. I'm just explaining. If you go read a lot of books, it'll show you. They'll say that. Well, the pineal gland is part of the epithalamus. But in Tora Tora, because that's the book we're using, they list them all like that. And that's the way we'll run them. They're just 4 different parts. And where this structure is at is directly surrounding, 1/2 on each side of the 3rd ventricle for our CSF. The thalamus, which is the largest part of the diencephalon, has a very important job. And as long as you can label that, we'll be all right. I'm kidding. You have to label it, and it won't be colored. No, I'm kidding. You're not going to write up there, we're not labeling this at all. Here's what the thalamus. Thalamus is Grand Central Station. I've never been to New York, but I can picture a big train station, bus station, whatever it is. They're all in one spot. The thalamus is just a huge clump of nuclei. And what its function is all the sensory, except one. Almost every sensory, when it comes up, we said it's going to go to the cortex and cerebellum. It's going to go to different areas of the brain. Before it does that, it's going to have to go through the thalamus. In other words, sensory neurons are going to synapse with nuclei in the thalamus, and then they're going to go to where they need to go into the cortex or cerebellum, wherever it needs to go after that. So all ascending sensory generally goes through the thalamus. And it's the main, that's the key words you need to remember about thalamus, not Grand Central Station. Main relay station. And if you think about why we would need that is divergence. Sensory's coming in. If you're getting some sensory from your extremities and it's coming up, it doesn't just need to go to one area. Right? It doesn't need to tell just the cortex something. It needs to tell the cerebellum. It needs to tell a lot of different areas. And so all of that gets mapped out from the thalamus. Sensory. But definitely do not label that. And then, sorry, I should have switched the slides, but that's the words in what I was saying. It's a relay station for all sensory coming up. Except smell. We'll get to it.
Why?
Except smell.
Why?
I don't know.
Nobody knows.
Yeah. De novo. I'm not looking that up anymore. Oh. All right, that was good. I can't believe I missed that. Can't believe I missed that. I never heard that. I like that. Man, I'm using that next semester. I'm just letting you know. I still, every day, I have nothing original. Nothing. I rely on other people for my material. Okay, the hypothalamus. You're probably already tired. If you're really getting into endocrine, you get tired of hearing about the hypothalamus, pituitary. How many hormones does the pituitary gland make versus release? Key things about endocrine, but y'all even talked about that yet?
Yeah.
So the hypothalamus is a smaller portion of the diencephalon, and it's located inferior to the thalamus. So you'd have your thalamus taking up a large portion, and then this is your hypothalamus. In other words, below the thalamus. And coming off of that is your pituitary gland. The hypothalamus is a major regulator, of the endocrine system. So, in the diencephalon, we would also look at mammillary bodies that we said are anterior structures, because they're really just part of the hypothalamus, and they serve as relay stations for smell. So you actually have reflexes to smell, and if you ever go in the third floor bathroom over there for the men, about an hour after lunch, you'll hit that reflex really quickly, right? That's the worst bathroom in the building. I'm not going to tell you where the good bathrooms are, because then I wouldn't have them. I'm keeping that information to myself. Some of y'all have already found them, but I've been here longer, so I know where they're at. That one's terrible. I went in there long ago. I haven't been in there in a while. And there's still a bunch of smell good stuff up on the ledges. Sorry. Infundibulum. Infundibulum is the stalk that connects the pituitary gland to the hypothalamus. So just that little connected area. You notice I just left it as it's a major structure for concern in the tuberal region. Leaving that to Rogério. We're just going to generally discuss what the hypothalamus does. We're looking at the anatomy side. The hypothalamus, we say, is controlling all of the body's homeostasis along with the nervous system. And both of those do that. So the hypothalamus and its involvement with the pituitary and the release of these hormones is going to allow it to control different body areas through releasing those. When we look at when you look at all of the endocrine glands that we talk about, the pituitary gland is the regulator of the endocrine system, but the hypothalamus is the boss, as I say, of the pituitary gland. So the analogy I make is the pituitary gland is the boss of the endocrine system. The hypothalamus is the boss's boss. All right. So the pituitary gland is the colonel, hypothalamus is the general. All right, finishing out this, we have the epithalamus. You have what's called habenular nuclei, and that's associated with olfaction. When we get into special senses, we kind of get into that, because you have, once again, just like if you walk in that bathroom or different things in life, you have olfactory responses to odors. Your olfactory system is connected to a system called the limbic system. The limbic system is associated with memory. And so you can smell something, just like the song Remembers When, you can smell something and also trigger a memory too. It's going to help connect that. And the pineal gland is important because it releases melatonin. The main thing. That's all we're going to talk about, and that's good because you don't need to hear it twice from hearing anything. And now we've gotten all the way up, we're going to just start discussing and switch kind of gears to talk about the cerebrum. And once again, the outer gray area is all the neurons, the cell bodies, and all of the white area is going to be its myelinated tracts. We call the gray area the cerebral cortex, and we'll continue to refer to that. Now, just because there's a separation in the color doesn't mean there aren't some, like the reticular formation, different areas. You can find some cell bodies mixed in with the white matter, but for the most part, it's set up that way. We'll see some interesting stuff about the cerebrum. First, you have to get to the anatomy. It's folded. Each one of these folds is called a gyrus. And going between them is called a sulcus, as we name them. If the groove is deeper, it would be a fissure. So this line, we could go all the way down. This is the longitudinal fissure. So if you think of the difference, the sulcus is just in between. The brain's really wrinkled, and a sulcus goes down in between. So you have a lot of sulcus, but you only have a few fissures. So picture the fissure being deeper. And actually, remember we talked about the dura mater extending down between the cerebral hemispheres? We had the tentorium cerebelli, tentorium cerebrum. That separation that goes down through it is going through the longitudinal fissure. So that separates the left and right halves of the cerebrum. The reason this is when you're young, your brain's growing very fast. Right? But what's growing very fast are the neurons. And so you start to multiply neurons into that small area, and the cortex and everything starts to develop, and so it starts to wrinkle in on itself. Now, myelin, you have to make the neuron first, and then you myelinate the axon. So the overlying gray matter from all those white matter tracks that will be there eventually develops first, and then you start to myelinate the tracks. Because of that growth, and it's inside of a closed cavity, that gives it that wrinkled appearance, which really is just to increase the amount of surface area available. So you can pack more and more neurons in there. And golly, I say the strangest things. I gotta quit. I guess. I just thought of a new term for somebody. Like, yeah, he's a slick brain person. Smooth. Doesn't have any increased surface area. Slick brain. I'm gonna use that one. I got just the buddy for that one. He's not gonna get it though. He doesn't have anything to do with medicine. Smooth brain. Smooth brain's a better way to say it. He's smooth brain. You're welcome to steal that too. Hard body. Corpus callosum. You get these fancy names, but really the corpus callosum plays a very important role. If the right and left cerebral hemispheres are not in physical contact, how do they communicate to each other? Because they do. And there are several different ways. I want to say ways because they're named different things. And the corpus callosum just happens to be one of those ways. It's the largest bundle of fibers that connects the right and left cerebral hemispheres. And what separates those hemispheres, we said, is the longitudinal fissure. This is a good picture to show that's a fissure. Here's a sulcus. So that, we talk about the right and left cerebral hemispheres controlling different things, but really they're identical. I'm going to show you what that means. And they communicate with each other. The textbook way to divide it up is to say, well, we have the lobes of the cerebrum. Nowadays, there's actually 5 different lobes. We've always taught these 4. You have a frontal lobe, you have parietal lobes, 2 temporal lobes, and then you have the occipital lobe posteriorly. Just because I've been asked before, yes, this is on each side. You also have, and I'm just going to show you it, and we're not going to really talk about it, but you have a lobe that they've decided is deep here to the temporal and parietal lobes. I hate that thing. Down in here, it's called the insula. I'm just saying it so you've heard it. I took it off the slide, the actual name, because I wasn't asking you anything about it. You probably never talked about it. It's not fully explained yet. There's studies out there, but that way you didn't think it was, you didn't give it test importance. So I took it out. The central sulcus is going to be separating the frontal and the parietal lobe. So this would be the central sulcus. If you think about the differences in terminology, we want to use sulcus here because there's a sulcus that separates those 2 lobes. But it's not as deep as a fissure, so there's still physically the neurons can talk directly to each other in those lobes. You just had this deep sulcus there. And then you have a lateral cerebral sulcus that separates the frontal and temporal lobes. I got to take these. So that's actually over here. Then you have the parietal occipital sulcus that separates the parietal lobe and occipital lobe. Are there a lot more named sulcus? Yes. But we're just not going into them. We're just, all you need to know here is, you don't even need the picture, really. It's just what is the name, the three that we have here, what do they separate? That's all I'm trying to get to you. I mean, I would be able to identify it too. It just should be simple if you know the lobe. So those are all lobes, but they talk to each other. Both cerebral hemispheres talk to each other. Each side talks to its two different parts of that cerebral hemisphere. So we name these. So the corpus callosum was just one of them. We have association tracts that conduct nerve impulses between the gyri, or each folded area in the hemisphere. Then we have commissural tracts. Commissural tracts are going to conduct nerve impulses from a gyri in one cerebral hemisphere to a gyri in the other cerebral hemisphere. That's called the corpus callosum. There's three different ones there. The corpus callosum is the largest tract there. And then the projection tracts are going to be any tract that goes from the cerebrum down out of the cerebral area to lower center, down the brainstem, spinal cord, that kind of stuff. And so you could look at it as, y'all have big classes nowadays, and actually your class, y'all may have the smallest class here at the moment, right? I just noticed that, 64. I don't know what the other numbers are. Not that that matters. We had 29 when I was here. It makes you sad to see somebody go on 29. Yeah. I'm not going to get into that story. Yeah. This side of the room is we'll call y'all, how you're looking at me, we'll say, well, this is the left cerebral hemisphere. Here's the right cerebral hemisphere. Association tracts would be like a couple of y'all sitting next to each other are talking to each other. You're associating. They're associating in this. Well, if you look at the corpus callosum, which is the commissural tract, it'd be like this side commissioning somebody to go over to that side and talk to them. I don't recommend that. You know what I mean? But you could go over there if you wanted to and talk to them using a commissural tract. Then if collectively either cerebral hemisphere wants to talk to the IPAP office, they could project a tract out to there. So you're projecting it out of the cerebrum. My example for you. All right, basal ganglia is part of this area that we can map out. A very important part for medically, it's broken into several different parts. The basal ganglia and the thalamus lie close together, and they're separated by an area called the internal capsule. So this is thalamus. Remember, there were two halves. The red thing there is thalamus. There are two halves to the thalamus with a third ventricle in between them. And then dividing the thalamus in the area called the basal ganglia is these fibers that come down. That's called the internal capsule. Just the separation that's there. And then you have a couple of nucleus here. You have the lentiform nucleus, which consists of the putamen and the globus pallidus. All of this called the corpus striatum. Do not care if you can label the different nucleus here. Actually, I'll simplify it even more. The caudate nucleus of the basal ganglia area is one that we separate. You have a caudate nucleus, and then you have a lentiform nucleus. Collectively, all of this is just called the corpus striatum, and I'm fine with you just recognizing that you have the corpus striatum, right? And that when we generally reference this area, we're calling it the basal ganglia. That makes sense? You don't need to break down and figure out which nucleus is which. Because really all I'm going to talk about is the basal ganglia. So if you recognize that the basal ganglia exist, but collectively that whole area is corpus striatum, but basal ganglia, because this area helps regulate what's called initiation and termination of movements. Right? And it helps to control unconscious contractions of skeletal muscles. It helps with muscle tone. We're starting to see that there's more than one area that's going to help do an action. But the basal ganglia are thought to be involved. You know, we have other areas that help to initiate and terminate movements, but it's important in the basal ganglia, even though I'm not being as clear as I'd like to. It's important because of the bottom part. It's involved in action selections. So the decision of which of several different actions that you might decide to do. It's, you know, think of it, rather than think of it as sitting here like, you know, do I want to stick my arm out here, or do I want to raise it up? Don't think like that. I mean, that would be kind of true. But think of it more like a quick situation, like you're following actions. That can help sort that out so you can do that quickly. But we're going to see it's not just that, because damage to the basal ganglia is associated with Parkinson's disease. All right, let me say that backwards. It's a better way to say it. Parkinson's disease is associated with damage to the basal ganglia. Because guess what the basal ganglia has? Melanin pigmented dopamine producing neurons. Now we saw that in the brainstem already once, right? And I said there's another area. Well, the basal ganglia also has dopamine producing neurons. So anytime you hear that you have a problem with dopamine, you're often looking at Parkinson's disease. That's one of those take-homes, you know, clinical pearls. If you hear that, they're probably talking about Parkinson's disease. And I said it on the other end, is it always Parkinson's? No. There are a lot of different movement disorders, but that's the most prominent one that we see and talk about. And so you're pretty safe when you get to like pants questions and stuff. If somebody's talking about damage to the basal ganglia, or you hear dopamine, you're pretty safe in going with Parkinson's. Right? They're not going to ask you the abnormal outside ones. So if you have damage to the basal ganglia, that's where you have uncontrollable shaking, muscular rigidity, stiffness, involuntary muscle movements. There's a gentleman in the church I go to that lives in a nursing home down the road from it. He's always there singing in the choir, and I always think about this because he has Parkinson's disease, and he stands up there singing. He's real rigid the whole time he's moving. You can see that. I'm not making fun of the guy. I'm using him as an example. Actually, he's a really nice guy. He has Parkinson's. But you also find basal ganglia damage. They're starting to do more studies in people that have obsessive compulsive disorder. So I may have a little bit of damage there. I'm not really OCD. I just act like I am. ADHD. I don't have obsessive compulsive. I told y'all, I think, I have a new diet. They will not put it in the psychological criteria DSM-D manual for me. But I'm trying to lay claim, I'm joking, but I'm trying to lay claim to a disorder I want to put in. It's called functional OCD. It means it gets the job done, OCD. And that stems, y'all stop me right away so I continue. It stems from the fact when I was here at PA school, I lived at Randolph. I don't think I told those classes. I think I told some people in the back this time. I lived at Randolph, and it was right after 9/11. We were the next class. And this base used to be wide open. Like every civilian in town would cut through it, especially Harry Warsbacher Cross. You could cut out and get downtown really quickly. Then they closed it up. And if you got to the gate and didn't have your ID card, they weren't letting you on at the time. It was a little more, it was real strict at the time. And so the PA school, you know, it was harder both ways uphill in the snow when I was here. If you showed up on exam day at the gate without your ID card and didn't get on, guess what you got for the test? 0. You weren't here, you got a 0. You couldn't call anybody, they didn't give a damn. Like, you can't listen. I know y'all don't believe me, but that's true. And so I would leave Randolph and I would check that I had my ID card 2 or 3 times before I got there. Guess what I did on the way in from Burning? I checked at least twice that I got my ID card to get on base. And does it really matter? Now, there's functional OCD. Functional. Functional OCD. I don't care if your doorknobs are clean, but I am going to have my ID card when I get here. Now, I say all that with one caveat. It does bother me when you don't straighten the pictures in. I will if they're not clean. Let me straighten that. All right. You're going to develop some functional OCD here too if you haven't started already. The limbic system. This is interesting. This will be fun. Limbic systems are emotional brain. And your feelings.
Thank you.
It's called the emotional brain because it helps to regulate. They know all this true emotion. Pain, docility, whether you're anger, you have affection, and everybody kind of differs in this area, right? The limbic system is not just a bunch of specialized neurons in one area that only do that. So sometimes when you look at areas of the brain, they do more than one thing. So the limbic system, if you were to go, hey, I want to figure out what area helps to control memory or learning, or I want to figure out what controls anger, and you get people angry and they map, I don't know how they exactly did it, I'm sure they put probes and stuff in a Hannibal Lecter light, and they cut their head off. Anyway, and they figured out, well, these areas, they scan them, they don't cut their head off. These areas light up. And so that area is now called the limbic system. It's where they map these functions to happen from. Doesn't mean something else doesn't happen there too. They're mapped to that area. And it's circling the brainstem. That has a bunch of funny names. Like I said, it's an interesting area. You have the hippocampus, the amygdala, what's called the limbic lobe, the dentate gyre. Don't worry, we're not spinning them. We're not going to get real detailed in every one of these. It becomes a list. Mammillary bodies are part of the limbic system. Remember, the mammillary bodies were relaying the sense of smell. One of the areas it's going to relay it to is this area of the brain called the limbic system, so you can have a memory of the smell and link those together. Anterior medial nuclei of the thalamus, great. I didn't tell you that. Olfactory bulbs, we got to smell to get it to the mammillary bodies, and the fornix. Now that's just a list. Only key in on what I'm going to talk about on the slides. Like, we're not going to talk in detail about most of those. But we are going to look at things like the hippocampus, because you're trying to develop a stronger hippocampus right now. The hippocampus takes new information and turns it into long-term memories. Right? In other words, how do you remember something? Right? Versus short-term, long-term. But as you learn new information, the hippocampus is attempting, or that's the area that would be responsible for taking that new information and deciding to put it into long-term memory. I find that very interesting, and I read a lot of books on that, and one of them I loved. I read during PA school, and I used it during PA school, and it was called Everyday Memory Builder, and it taught you how to remember things. Like what goes on in this schoolhouse that would be very beneficial is the first thing he taught me to do in that is to make a list and remember. How many lists do we do? And that became invaluable. Have y'all ever used, I'm not talking about those crazy mind maps. I don't get that at all. But like visual memory learning, using your brain, or like closing your eyes and picturing that maybe you're opening up into this mansion and it has a long hall and it has doors that open all the way down the hall. And the first door on the right is the pharmacy door, and you walk in there and there's a bunch of shelves, and you have your ACE inhibitors, your beta blockers, your calcium channel blockers, your antibiotics back here. That's true from when I was in PA school. That's still the visual that I had so that I could link things together. Anyway, he talked a lot about that in the book. Well, that's the reason I say that is that's using very abstract type of ideas, like mnemonics are another example. You're using something to trick your hippocampus basically into thinking this is more important than it is. And the stranger it is, or like y'all often do, the sexually explicit it is, anything that makes it crazy kind of to your brain, it thinks for some reason it needs to keep that info. You can trick your brain into remembering things. Anyway, that book teaches you real quick how to make a list of 10 things and remember them like that. I'm not going to go into it. I gave it to somebody last semester. I had one in my office. Okay, the amygdala is involved in things like rage, docile behavior, absence of fear or aggression, restlessness. And you would find differences in this area because some people obviously have more rage or aggression for whatever reason. Well, it's mapped to this area. And then you have the olfactory bulbs. The olfactory bulbs, we're going to get to this, but when we look at the nasal epithelium just above there, we have the olfactory bulbs where the olfactory nerves are going to synapse with that. For now, they're just relaying information back to the mammillary bodies. So that's all part of your limbic system. You will not have to label the limbic system. It's just, this is areas they mapped out, but I don't want you labeling this picture for sure. I always try to say that on those busy pictures that I look at, but I ain't touching that. The cingulate gyrus, that's the other reason I said that is because I have this in red. I'm just trying to annotate what it's at. You don't have to label it. Cingulate gyrus is above the corpus callosum, and it's involved with emotion, formation, and processing, learning, and memory. Helps to coordinate, regulate aggressive behavior. I'm just reading off the slide because mediates emotional responses to pain. The key here is that the limbic system, there are multiple areas that do they both do a certain action. All right, so then it becomes just a definition thing. You can't ask, well, which area is responsible in the limbic system for aggressive behavior? Well, you couldn't put cingulate gyrus and amygdala on there because that's really, they both kind of help with that. We're getting to the interesting part. I know we're at 3. We got 2 slides. The fornix is an area, the main job of the fornix of the limbic system is to carry information from the hippocampus back here to the mammillary bodies. It forms an arch, over the thalamus. So it's carrying signals from the hippocampus to the hypothalamus, specifically the mammillary bodies. Mammillary bodies is part of that hypothalamus. So it's just a pathway. The last thing we'll talk about, we'll take a break, is damage to this area. So if you damage the hippocampus, and it's the key gateway to take new information and put it into long-term information. In other words, think of it, we've all heard of short-term memory, long-term memory. So if you want to take a short-term memory and force it or move it into long-term memory, it has to go through the hippocampus. It will be processed through that area. And so if you damage this area, this is probably how they figured all that out, is you start to have what's called anterograde amnesia. There are different types of amnesia, but in this situation, you have a loss, we'll underline too, loss of the ability to form new memories, although old memories aren't safe. So you're going to have a good memory of your childhood and everything before your injury, but you can't make new memories after 41st dates or whatever, right? There's another show out, I think, nowadays. Groundhog Day, yeah. Is there, what else? What y'all have? Y'all seen that? Oh, that's, did he? Yeah, he's just, that's something weird. But oh, Drew Barrymore, she had to wake up every day. Anyway, she had anterograde amnesia. May or may not ever get better. Some of them do, some don't. But I find that really interesting because you look at those people and they may or may not physically have like identifiable brain damage, but for whatever reason, it happens to people all the time. They get hit in the head. I'll leave it at this for the break. What I want to know is how people have a traumatic brain injury and wake up speaking French. You ever seen those people? I'm like, I don't know whether to believe that or not, but they're out there. But anyway, you got to find interesting stuff about this, or it just gets boring. How do they wake up speaking French? Let's take a break. I'm hoping I wake up speaking Spanish tomorrow. I'd really like to know that.
It's like there's gotta be one out there.
Oh man.
I'm trying to make a difference. I've seen even like
Some have a more foul or try to like make sense.
Like tunnel vision.
Yeah. That's crazy.
See, I saw some snowboarders trying to snow.
I think she probably like didn't do
Last time they saw him, he was top.
I saw the posters, you know, those like motivational posters people have in their office. There was one that my old boss had. It was like, yeah, motivated to basically was saying that like everybody who signed off ever said that they were a motivated person. They were gonna do it. It's like it's really motivation.
I know what you're talking about. I can't remember the quote.
Yeah.
It was encouraged.
Basically, that's the way I took it.
Now you got to start on it. I got to start. All something. All these people that Should we reverse some questions? I got some points. Straight over. I got 5 examples. We only got 4.
Yeah, but every little bit helps.
No. Those were not, I know my last A&P test was the lowest score I got. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure I got it. Yeah, so I'm not clear. Which is your first? What?
You also buy
I texted my wife. I was texting my quarters. No, I got nothing.
Yeah, I think the only natural thing about America is it's like their go-to.
Hey, no one's that I'm smart. I'm dumb. I'm high functioning. I'm high functioning.
I said socially awkward.
Socially awkward. I still have a social life. I don't have a social life. My social life is my dog and my wife. My girl. Very nice.
Apparently you got like 9.
I don't remember the one that got wrong.
I know.
From my girl. I mean, it was only two.
In that moment, like, yeah, I want to listen, but also,
Yeah, but I feel like there's no finals, so it's like wrong. I like to see what I got wrong, but like I don't write it down. So, like, if they don't throw it out, what's the point? Oh, man.
I haven't seen it yet.
usually they always come in. You're gonna be terrible.
Never in my year I would have been searching microbiology. I would have been some of the dumbest.
No. That's kind of part of life. Rereading. Yeah. Should like do putting myself in this fine gentleman's shoes here to my left, and to have to be absorbing this while still not having the other tests taken. How was your son?
Laid up?
Yeah. Is he? Are they putting cast on?
Yeah.
Is he like? Is it suspended? I'm curious. Like, I'm curious for a 3-year-old. What do they give him drug-wise to take? Just Tylenol?
Tylenol.
Yeah. You can't give him much stronger stuff, but like I feel like for an adult, they would. He's got his chest.
He tried to punch his brother with it yesterday. I was like, dude, give it a week at least.
He tried to punch his brother.
Yeah, he like balled his hands up. I'm
You're
like,
like, hey,
you can't use that arm like that.
Never too injured for a fight. Never too injured for a fight. Yesterday we were learning how to ride on a bike. She got up and she was riding on 5, whatever the straight for her. Like she's like on her toes are barely touching the ground on the thing. And it's got a handbrake. I don't know what happened. She like maybe she panicked and squeezed it. I wasn't expecting like momentum shift. She squeezed it and then just like literally like a cartoon. Just like bloop, like right. Bike was on top of her, just sitting, and it didn't fall. It just sat on top of her. She freaked out. No damage. No face. Like a little cut maybe. Like yeah, she liked it. So
Yeah. I also have a shit ton of
now
people want price on like mine too. It's okay back.
It's just like me running around outside last night, trying to chase you down. She doesn't.
I have like
She can't pedal. So we always start on the hill. Every time she pedals, her feet slip on. Falls to your feet. Kind of like middle center mass.
I was like, what? That's what Joe did. Yeah, it looks like
Doesn't work. You ever try to ride a bike, try to put it with your foot on the pedal, see if you can get it to come back around. Like it feels like, yeah. But she doesn't, and her foot falls off. So she spends most of the time with her feet off the pedal, just using her feet off. Attached to it.
It's easier to maintain momentum when you're locked in.
Yeah.
It's for longer rides. It's a lot better.
maybe you're gonna be right.
Yeah, I used to. I did the entire Natchez Trace, the 466 miles. I did it in 4 days.
What about it?
It's from Tennessee down to Mississippi.
You did it in 4 days.
Ass was hurting.
I bet your gooch was screaming.
Yeah, but it's nice. It's like a back road, so it's only 55 miles an hour on that road, and it's just like a nice.
Yeah. People are like flying by.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only like scary part was starting in Tennessee, where it starts is like a bunch of uphill bridges and stuff. So you're just bombing hills at like 50 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have any of my like cycling bikes here. I just have my Gary Fisher like mountain bike. Yeah.
I got my e-bike.
Yeah.
Moving.
Yeah.
I'm moving
I see
around
you
post.
zooming.
I'm moving around post, man. It's awesome. I'm waiting because I think so there's like classes of e-bikes. Yeah, I think mine's illegal. Yeah, I don't think you're allowed to have that over 20 miles an hour. Here it's like you're only allowed to have class 2 bikes in Texas. It's like 22 miles an hour.
Because then when I go back,
Yeah, but like nobody's gonna like. Yeah, what they're gonna do is to know that you get one and ride it. You know what I mean? If they clock me at 28, I guess really I was pedaling hard. Yeah. Not a lot though. But I didn't have a great. I had like a hybrid bike, so it was like. You could do both. You could hit some trails if they were like nice and kept. You could ride on the road. Was it made for like just straight road riding? So like that ride, the end of it, like I didn't ride enough. I'd also been struggling with also like the other direction. Or closer. Yeah.
That's it right there.
Wow.
That's cool.
Is it? I assume because you're going down elevation, it wouldn't be too bad. Obviously, you said the first part.
It's pretty flat for the most part. Once you get out of Tennessee, it's
I
like
was
pretty flat.
like, yeah. Tennessee, any east of Nashville, you're.
It was raining the first 2 days too.
Dang, and you still did it.
Well, my mom, it was me and my dad did it. My mom was following us.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
She would like meet where y'all were stopping at night or something like that.
Was it like a race or was it just a route?
No, we were just doing it.
That's cool. Yeah, Sailor did one lap. I'm like, I got the fuck up. here, look it up. Yeah. I was like, hey, she was like talking big game before she even started. She's like, help me with the bike rides. I was like, you can't pedal, you can't bike. I can't be coming back every 5 seconds to push you. Yeah. She was late compared to me for the bike game. She did her balance bike in a while. So it's like ones with no pedals and strider bikes where they just like use their feet to push, which helped a lot with balance. But like, I don't know. I have a memory when I was a kid of like riding around my driveway.
Two things can be true.
Yeah. Yeah.
4 hours.
Not too much.
I
She's swimming
kind
good
of
too.
like studied a little bit,
Like low stress. She did thing.
I guess I can 5 hours.
Right now, bath time.
I'm in bed by
Like
11
6, right? 6 months.
Almost 7.
Almost 7 months. Like, start submerging her face. Oh, yeah. Yeah, like in the bath, like, I remember, did you do that to your boys?
Big cup of water, just pour it on
Oh,
my head.
yeah. Do that a lot. Yeah, because eventually they start learning to, like, okay, they're gonna drink some water, they're gonna breathe it in. But, like, if you start doing that, and you start doing, like, you blow in their face as you dip them, the baby reflexes, like when you blow in their face, they like hold their breath, so you get that used, and then you just keep getting used to it. Yeah. Eventually it becomes natural.
Like this is my 3-year-old. It took him 2 days.
Yeah.
This is like the day he broke his arm.
Oh, really?
Nice, buddy. He's only 3?
Yeah.
That's
But
awesome.
then my almost 5-year-old would ease into the water.
Yeah, nice and slow. That 5-year-old is like your image.
Yeah.
It's like you and a 5-year-old. Yeah. Yeah, like she just recently really started like going near water. So like she'll like throw stuff in and then she'll like dive down to go get it. I don't know where that came from.
It just takes them once or twice and they're good.
And then she'll come up and she'll be like hyperventilating. She's like doesn't hold her breath like I'm like, are you okay? Yeah, just do it again.
I didn't mean to take so long, but I got. As usual, I went to talk to some people and I got tied up talking about. We were looking at the positive side of finishing PA school, one of the things, and I was encouraging you that I won't get all into that, but at the end I said, we were talking about money and being a PA, and this is the only interesting side that y'all probably don't know, is when I deployed to Kosovo, I'm going to shorten this as quick as I can. I deployed to Kosovo, I went to backfill a PA that was stuck there. His unit left him there and left the PA because they got to have a PA there. And if you've been to Kosovo, it's Camp Monteith. I don't think that's the camp either. There was Camp Bondstill and Monteith. Where's that? What's that? Bondstill still there? There was Monteith, which is a big area where they burned all these tires and made you sick with it. But it was a joke of a deployment. Combat deployment pay and all that. And you had Monteith down there. And I worked every other day. I had a doctor with me. I did sick call twice a day, but only every other day. That's all I had to do the whole time. I did not. And then I could throw my body armor in the back of the truck, jump in with the MSC, and we could drive off post and eat and stuff. It was crazy. Anyway, see, I made the story longer. The point here, I got a notification and all these emails from my Pentagon people, because they were working to get me there, and they sent me all this stuff and contact info for Central Texas College in Texas. Central Texas College had a little hub at Camp Monteith and Bondstill where the students were taking classes. But most of that was because I was going to be the PA there. We were transitioning medics from 91 Bravos to 68 Whiskeys. They had a transition that they had to do. And so they said, you must teach those classes when you're there. And you will be accredited with Central Texas College. You just had to get my CV I got registered as an instructor for Central Texas College. When I didn't realize I got there, the Army was fine with this. They paid me while I was receiving my active duty pay. And that was fine. So I was there 6 months, and I think I made almost $8,000 tax-free from Central Texas College just to go over like 3 times a week and teach for a couple of hours when I was doing nothing. We were talking about that in aspects where you could find stuff in the military, like moonlighting and things with PA if you want to do that. I don't do that. I don't moonlight anyway. I'm done. Done. I don't need extra work. But you will. And you will find them. Just like you'll find your niche in PA school. All these things that you study, you think you got to know everything. At the end of the day, you're going to find an area of PA practice that you like to practice in. That's all you're going to know. You go grab any PA over there and bring them in here and take an exam too. It ain't going to go good. It's not going to go good because they're not all. It's schoolhouse. You got to go through the pain to get there. Anyway, hope that didn't sound negative. I call it pain. Sometimes pain is good though. I led us all the way back to pain's protective. All right, cerebral cortex. We made it all the way up. It's the executive suite of the nervous system. If you want to have perception, remember to understand, like it says, appreciate all these conscious thoughts, you must have your cerebral cortex intact. Right, so the cortex is only going to be gray matter, neuron cell bodies. The dendrites, maybe some unmyelinated axons, right? And then you have glia. Glia is shortened for neuroglia. Remember, you have neurons and neuroglia. So you have the glia that surround them. Outside of that, you're just going to have the fiber tract. So there's no real blood vessels. Just picture a big clumps of neuron cell bodies. If we look at the brain, the cerebral hemispheres, it's going to look at where do these things occur. So normally the right side of the cerebral hemisphere is associated with things on the left side of the body. They're opposite. A lot of things decussate or cross over. But if you look at the two cerebral hemispheres, they're identical. I mean, they should be. Meaning, if you map out a certain function to one side, and you say, okay, well, this area does speech. We figured that out. We don't have the same area that does speech in the other hemisphere, but generally only use one side. And that's called hemispheric lateralization. And that's true in almost everybody. Right? The other side is, while they map them out and say, well, this area does speech. Okay, great, but they found out it does talk to everywhere else. So each cerebral hemisphere, if you have conscious behavior, that really involves the entire cortex. So if you're doing a certain action, multiple areas of your cortex would light up if they were scanning it, but one kind of lights up more than the other, and that's how they map these things out. Versus doing it the Hannibal Lecture way, where you just kind of stick probes in there while their head's stuck. Is that too old that y'all haven't seen it? They've had newer versions. Y'all know what I'm talking about when I say that? Where he's sitting, Silence of the Lambs, he's sitting in the chair. Go give it a shot. Good movie. All right. So as we divide these up, I like it. I like those type of things. Dark. I mean, my office is the old embalming office. I mean, come on. I used to embalm cadavers where I was at. Still a drain in the floor. It's just covered with this nasty carpet they gave me. Okay, sensory areas. We're going to look and map out these areas, not in detail. There are areas of the cerebral cortex that receive and interpret sensory. Then there are motor areas that initiate movements. And then there are association areas that help to basically react to all the sensory input, get things where they need to go. So a couple of gentlemen got, let's say, a lot of early neurologists originally started studying the brain. This is just background for fun. And they originally studied how thick it was in different areas. So they would go dig up illegally a corpse out of the cemetery at night, which is true, right? I guess. And they would measure the thickness of cerebral cortex tissue. And so they started labeling all these things. This is thinner, thicker, and they came up with this method. And then they gave them numbers. As you had a couple of people, doesn't matter who it was, that came along and started to map these areas. Say, okay, well, you name of that one 1, and it's this thick. And then they started to figure out what these areas do. And there, if you notice, there's what, 45 areas on there in each cerebral hemisphere that have mapped. There's probably more now. They're still doing this. Don't care about all these numbers. I'm not even going to go into the fact, I'm just going to mention. If you look in the blue there, the blue, if we were in therapy and stuff over there, we would talk more about these. But in the blue, this is your primary somatosensory area. The red is your primary motor area. You have secondary motor areas. We could talk all day and map this out. I don't expect you to know that. I highlighted the 2 that we're going to talk about and know. And I stuck to these because as PAs, these are the main 2 you're going to see going forward in PA school. They're going to talk about speech problems or aphasia. You need to know where these areas are at. So planning and production of speech is Broca's area. Right? Broca's area is found, and I'm not going to ask you to point it out on the cerebral cortex, but it's found kind of anterior laterally on each side. And then back here you have Wernicke's area. And Wernicke's area interprets the meaning of speech by recognizing spoken words. And I'm going to explain to you the differences. And I forgot to get it loaded up, but I'm going to load it up and see if we can get it working. Because I normally show a couple of videos with these. But they were talking my ear off, so I didn't get them. It was me talking, you know that. We're going to talk, this is actually interesting. Aphasia, meaning without speech, is the inability to either use or comprehend words. Use means to either say or write in a lot of cases. So the left cerebral hemisphere in most people is where we find Broca and Wernicke's areas active. And there's other aspects we associate with knowing language are found in that area. But what we want to look at is damage. So if you damage Broca's speech area, you get what's called non-fluent aphasia. And they have an inability to articulate what they want to say. So they know what they want to say, but they can't speak. So it would sound kind of like this. And I'm going to show you the video. I'm going to kill 5 minutes loading them, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because that was my negative, not to get done. In Broca's, let's say I'm a patient and I'm sitting in front of you and you say, all right, what brings you in today? And we're talking about people who might have had a stroke. Right? What brings you in today? I heard that. What brings you in today? You said it, and my answer is, I'm not feeling well and I have a headache. And when they try to say this, it's going to come out as, well, I have head, and they can't find the words. It's like somebody trying, what's that word? Somebody's rolling their eyes in their head trying to think of the word. That looks like a broken. But they can speak, but their speech is going to be all broken up because they can't find the right words. It's going to sound like me teaching. No, I'm kidding.
So is that their ability to think about like vernacular and actual verbiage? Can they write it down better than they can speak it, or is it just the actual physical speech pattern?
It varies, but it often affects both. So somebody with Broca's, and you'll see a gentleman here on the screen that has it. He probably has problems writing too, because it depends on which area is specifically damaged. Because if we broke it down further, there's actually areas that are looking for word recognition in writing versus saying it. So it could vary. But most of the time you're going to learn it as they can't find the words they want to say. But they understood you, and you can tell that they're trying to answer that they understood you. You'll understand them. you won't understand Wernicke's at all. Wernicke's is called fluent aphasia. People with fluent aphasia have a faulty understanding of written or spoken words. They may or may not be hearing you. A lot of times, they probably understand what you're asking them, and they're going to answer you perfectly fine. They have what's called a word salad. So they have an inability to understand spoken words very well and an inability to understand written words and to relay those. So if you see somebody with Wernicke's, they're going to get, yeah.
Are these areas associated with
No. Stuttering is completely different, but there are areas that they mapped out for, I mean, it wouldn't be involved in this region. Because stuttering, if it was comparable, I would think, like stuttering, like Mel Tillis. Anybody know Mel Tillis? He stuttered, but if he sang, he didn't stutter. Two different areas of the brain. You're getting into what I say, this is interesting. Wernicke's, we're going back, Wernicke's word salad. They're going to get very frustrated with you because when you talk to them, let's say they're in the ER, and you say, what brings you in today? Their answer is going to sound, in their mind, let's say that they understood you and they're replying, they would say in their mind, I have a headache. But I have a headache and I've had it all day long. But what you're going to hear from them is, well, that hat is next to that dog. I don't know what she's doing, but I was over here next to, well, there's a cat up in that tree. They're just going to word salad. They're making it up. And you're going to ask them again, and they often relay this in like neurology classes. They'll say these people become very frustrated because in their mind they said, I have a headache and I've had it all day. And every time you ask them, you're going to hear a word salad. But it's like, do you not understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? Kind of thing. Give me just a second. Study some more A&P 2 and I'll pull this up. I got to go through a new security clearance just to get on YouTube. So, my goodness. This is the third time I've been in a password. This is great. Where's my IT people? What happened to security versus easy use? There has to be a conflict.
we have both today. One just right after lunch.
Okay, it's broken. Let's hope we got sound.
Can you tell us your name?
Hey, look at that.
Mike Caputo.
And Mike, when was your stroke?
I was 7 years ago,
Okay.
and
Sorry.
And what did you used to do?
Worked
Yeah, broken.
on the desk, seven sales and worldwide, and very good. Yeah.
Okay. And who are you looking at over there when you turn your
That's
head?
my wife.
Okay. And why is she helping you to talk?
She's a speech.
So you have trouble with your speech?
Yeah.
And what's that called?
Aphasia.
All right. And so why don't you work now?
I do.
And what do you do now?
Voices of Hope Aphasia.
And what is Voices of Hope?
Peterburg, and Dr. Hinckley, and myself, founder for me, and I members the members probably 60 people.
So 60 people are part of Voices of Hope,
Yes.
which is an aphasia support group
Yes.
that you founded,
Yes.
and Dr. Jackie Hinckley is part of that.
Yes.
Okay, great.
It's not a support group.
No,
It's
it's programs. It's 3 days. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and and they laugh and talked. Music here, just beautiful. It's
Great.
yeah.
Can you tell me, what does it feel like to have aphasia?
It's hard. It's well, it's speech. It's like words that don't understand. Brain is good, but it's speech like I don't know. It's like words, yuck.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much.
Good.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
A simple thumb trick discovered by NASA scientists could be the key to reversing memory
This is gonna be
decline.
Warnicky.
Here's how it works.
I was gonna pause it for a second. What's that? I don't take responsibility for any side ads on YouTube. I'm not logged into my YouTube. Mine would just be auto videos. It wouldn't be anything interesting. How to review something. So that's Broca's. And we're not here to learn all the meta. It's just interesting. That's the only reason I show that. Is I want you to know those areas exist and which one's fluent versus non-fluent. Whether you fully understand the fun stuff we're talking about, it just makes it a little more interesting. But we're going to see Warnicki's real quick, and that's Byron. If you don't notice, it makes me want to cruise because they're on a cruise ship. If you weren't watching, well, you can tell by if you've ever been on one, it looks just like a cruise ship closet. But anyway, it's moving the whole time you're going. The walls and not. It makes me want to book a cruise though. I don't have time for that. Warnicki's is very interesting. I met a guy named Billy Joe Jim Bob once in Louisiana after a Fort Polk exercise down there. And he exists. And I'm pretty sure he must have had Warnicki's too. But this is Byron, and I would like to hang out with Byron. Because me and Byron could have, and I'm not making fun of Byron at all. I'm being dead serious. We could go have some fun. But this seriously would be a very bad thing. You wouldn't want to have this. And Byron seems very happy, but most people are pretty frustrated.
Hi, Byron, how are you?
I'm happy. Are you pretty? You look good.
What are you doing today?
We stayed with the water over here at the moment and talked with the people for them over there. They're diving for them at the moment. But they'll save in the moment. He'll have water very soon for him. With luck for him.
So we're on a cruise and we're about to get
We
to
will
Juneau.
store it right here and they'll save their hands right there for them.
And what were we just doing with the iPad?
Our right at the moment, they don't show a darn thing.
With the iPad that we were doing. We, like, here?
I'd like my change for me and change hands for me. With Happy, I would talk with Donna sometimes. We're all with them. Other people are working with them and them. I'm very happy with them. This girl was very good and happy when I play golf and hit other trees. We play out with the hands. We save a lot of hands on hold for people, for us, other hands. I don't know what you get, but I talk with a lot of hand for hand. Sometimes. Am I talk of any more than saying?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I hope the world lasts you.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
That is my favorite. That is my favorite line. I hope the world lasts for you today.
I got a question.
Yes.
In like the warning aphasia, is it? I've done like some research about it. Do they often try to say words, or do they often say words that have like a pattern with the word you're trying to say? So like if they're trying to say like head hurts, they'll say bed, shirts, things of that nature. Like it'll rhyme, or it'll be like in some way related to what they're trying to say.
I'm not an expert on it, but I think so. And actually, when you say that, you can see him trying to read what she's saying to him. You know what I mean? He reacted to different things she asked him. And I don't know if they rhyme them or not. But it sounds like it.
And so they don't have a real understanding of what we say. What we say comes off broken.
There's both ways, yeah. They described it different when I was in like neurology. They would say, yeah, they're understanding you and they're answering you, but they have this word salad. So they get frustrated with you. But now remember, we're just glancing the top of it. There's so much more to this, and everybody's always really interested in it. It is very interesting, but it won't be interesting when you're in neuro. You're going to be deep into so many other classes. You're going to no, I'm kidding. At some point, maybe you'll be a PA neurologist. Who had a question?
Just maybe to get too deep with it. Is there any correlation between, like the first guy with Brokaw's? He obviously had some kind of like hemiparesis going on where his right arm wasn't working. So, like, is there a correlation between motor activation with like a Brokaw's lesion versus Orticke's? The other guy seemed like still pretty mobile, and just obviously not.
It'd be no different than all strokes. Every stroke's kind of different in what you actually lose and what comes back, how quickly they got some TPA to you, that kind of stuff. That's clot busting. Me and my wife have a policy, mainly she does, that if I walk in and she's stroked out, I have to close the door and wait an hour before I call EMS. Y'all think I'm joking. No, I don't. I mean, it can vary greatly. Strokes vary greatly. And he could have been like that in the beginning. Byron could have been like that in the beginning and then got it back. Maybe he never did. Just depends how big the stroke was. All right. So that was a little fun. Yes?
Are any of those people able to use like sign language to communicate, or it doesn't really matter?
It's a great question that I don't know, but it's a great question because it should. I mean, that's a different whole area. You are getting into the interesting side of it, and I'm just not a neurologist and know enough to explain that to you. That would be interesting. So y'all are all going to be neuro PAs. Mind's a funny thing. When I say I find like spinal cord and stuff interesting, I also find the mind interesting. I don't really like neurology though. I like the rehab side of things. And I don't think I could deal with Byron on a daily basis. I didn't say I wanted to hang out with the guy all the time. I just saying once or twice. I would have hung out with him on that cruise. Y'all don't know me, because I'd have been at the bar with him, and we'd have been sitting there. And the first person to act like he's not talking straight, I would go off on him. What do you mean you don't understand it? What is wrong with you? I was just having. He's just being rude. He just answered you. Yeah, I know. I just act like I always knew what he was saying. That's the next person. Y'all see how my brain is. We got to get back to this hemispheric lateralization. The key here is that the left hemisphere, for most people, they map out, does most of the functions that we do, whether that be language, math. The other hemisphere, right, is more of the visual, spatial, arts and appreciation. And people use varying amounts, but most things, for most people, regardless of what hand you are, the left cerebral hemisphere controls most of them. Right? So that function is called hemispheric lateralization. And then the question comes up right away of, well, what if you have a stroke on the left side? Can you learn to use the right side? Can you rehab that? Yeah, they can. That takes a long time. But it's no different than saying, I'm right-handed, and you cut off my right arm. Can I write with my left hand? I was never able to do that very well before, but could I learn to do that? Yeah, you can learn to do that if you want to. And you can learn to use the opposite one. Whether that actually winds up involving the other hemisphere, that's up in the air. Right? But they can rehab some of these things. Okay. Another disorder, we're talking about cerebral disorders, is Alzheimer's. You know, it's one of those things. It's disabling senile dementia is the main term you'll hear a lot. You don't always hear Alzheimer's, but one of the clinical pearls for the name is disabling senile dementia. Because that implies the problem with Alzheimer's is you have a loss of reasoning and the ability, or even the want, to care for yourself. So there's a lot of different causes. You're seeing even more reasons now come up. But some of it's genetic, some of it's lifestyle, aging itself. A lot of people are older get Alzheimer's. You know, I tell my wife every day, you got Alzheimer's, remember. And I do say that a lot to her, but it doesn't go well. It's fun. Alzheimer's is not fun though. The problem with Alzheimer's, you got old Reagan up there had Alzheimer's, and it used to be he was very well known. Everybody kind of knew who he was and saw him go through his Alzheimer's dementia. He was publicly, that's why we use him. But it's going to progress. So initially, somebody with Alzheimer's is just going to look like they're getting older. They have trouble remembering recent events, like what they ate yesterday or who they met. And then they start to become confused and forgetful, start to remember things like, I drive, you know, I know what lane I'm going to be in from here to Bernie going and coming back. You know, and all of a sudden I don't even know how to get back to Bernie, that kind of stuff. I've been doing it for so many years. And then you start to lose memories. They even, unfortunately, start to forget people in their families and things. That's the saddest part of the thing of Alzheimer's is they don't recognize like their own child when they go to visit them. That's advanced. And eventually, death will come. Not from Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's physically is not going to kill you. What's going to kill you is senile dementia, which means you have a lack or the inability to want to care for yourself, and so they just stop caring for themselves. A lot of them are older and they wind up in a nursing home, and as we all know, I'm leading this with a joke. We all know that in every nursing home, they're at your every need. They get you up and out of bed every day. They make sure you get the bingo. Not really. No, if somebody has Alzheimer's, a lot of times they're physically fine. They just have Alzheimer's. They wind up laying in bed, and they wind up getting pneumonia. So something like pneumonia is going to take out somebody with Alzheimer's just because they don't want to get up and use the bathroom anymore. They don't want to brush their teeth. They don't care for themselves. And nursing homes don't care for them either, in my opinion. Most of them. I can say that only for the ones I've worked in. I'm not going to a nursing home. You will find me dead on 93 acres in Bernie. That's what's going to, I mean, from natural causes. When I feel that moment, I'm going to get up and walk out my back door and just walk down to the pond. They're going to wonder where I went for a few weeks, but they'll figure it out. It's my Carl Street. All right. Or maybe they won't care and never notice. Who knows? Alzheimer's disease, when you look at the clinical pearls that you'll always need to remember is you have a loss of neurons that release acetylcholine. Meaning you lose the neurons and it liberates that acetylcholine. So the nucleus basalis, the nucleus, we don't have enough names for things. Guess what the nucleus basalis actually is? The basal ganglia, right? That's called the nucleus basalis area, basal ganglia. So if you lose those neurons in that area, that's one of the clinical pearls of Alzheimer's. And then the other two are the ones you're going to distinguish it by is beta amyloid plaques. You have abnormal clusters of proteins outside of neurons, and then you have a fancy word, neurofibrillary tangles, abnormal protein filaments inside neurons. They found these at autopsy. Right? You're not going to cut somebody's brain open during their life to look for them. Yeah.
Isn't the beta amyloid plaque theory under fire right now?
Yeah. A lot of what causes Alzheimer's is under attack right now. And they're looking at a lot more environmental factors and things that we do. Just like they're looking so much. I didn't mean to spill off onto your thing. It is. They're looking at, because we're going to get to later to proteasomes, and proteasomes break down faulty proteins in cellular, inside and outside cells, or inside cells. So if you start to make a faulty protein, a proteasome will digest that and break it down. And they think problems with proteasomes may be a part of Alzheimer's, but like you said, newer studies are showing they may not be correct in why this is occurring. Interesting stuff. But for now, until you hear further, if you're taking the PANTS or a test and you hear beta amyloid plaques, neurofibrillary tangles, Alzheimer's. The loss of neurons, you can tie that in however you want, right? Nucleus basal ganglia, but that's also Parkinson's, right? So let's look at beta amyloid plaques, neurofibrillary tangles for your clinical courses. And here I'm just giving you something interesting. We're not going to figure out what causes Alzheimer's today. Definitions are yours. And perfect breaking spot. I didn't cover that many slides. That's good. We'll make it either way. We'll be fine. Because we're definitely not going to start cranial nerves. So here's what I need you to do: is at least tonight, do 15 minutes. I would love to raise. I don't like to have people raise hands, but if you do not know cranial, actually, even if you do know cranial nerves, but I'm going to talk to those. I'm going to assume that everybody's never seen cranial nerves. You've heard of them. They don't teach them real well and stuff. That's fine. You should know cranial nerves like military time. Meaning, if I say cranial nerve 8, your brain should immediately think vestibular cochlear. If I say cranial nerve 5, then you immediately go to trigeminal nerve. You need to get to that. So the first thing you could do if you want to spend 10 or 15 minutes tonight is get your mnemonic or however you want to memorize them and look at, okay, olfactory, cranial nerve this, facial this. Learn the names and the number. Now don't do like don't ask me this. Somebody asked me this one. Do we really need to know like the Roman numerals? Yeah, you do. That's part of cranial nerves. We say cranial nerve 8, but it's always listed as the Roman numeral 8. So you need to be able to recognize the Roman numeral. I don't know why they asked me that. But that'll help you. Because if not, because when an instructor's talking about them and you're like, okay, so here we have an introduction, this is cranial nerve 8, and it goes here, and you don't know it's vestibular cochlear, well, you need the name to link to tell you what it is. And if you don't like that reason, the last thing you want to miss on my test is a simple, what's the name of cranial nerve 3? Now, I know everybody just went ocular nerve, but so I mean, you got to know them. So that's a good place to start. And then let me come in and build what each one does. So we're going to spend a fair amount of time going through those cranial nerves tomorrow. That may be all we do tomorrow. I don't know how fast it goes. But you'll give yourself a good head start by knowing the names of them. Other than that, that's all I got for today. Good class, we had fun. We got a quad on a Tuesday. Good. Go home, think about Broca's. No, don't. Stop thinking about Broca's and Warnicki's and go study whatever's next. It is A&P II. Right? Y'all don't have a test Friday.
Yeah, we do.
What?
We don't have a test Monday.
What's Friday's A&P II? That means I gotta be here.